about UK-based project that also includes the Scottish Fishermen's Federation, the SFF, the MC, the Maritime Coastguard Agency, and their response contractor, Ambipar Response. Before we get into the presentation, I will just have a little bit of a quick safety moment. This presentation should take around about 35 to 40 minutes. So please make sure you are sitting comfortably. You've got a drink to hand potentially if you keep yourself hydrated. Just take a note of where your exits might be from the room that you're sitting in, just in case you do have an incident in your location. And if you happen to be driving, which I'm hoping you're not, but please do pull over. Okay.
Bye.
As I said, this presentation should last about 35 to 40 minutes. Please keep your microphones on mute during the webinar. We are going to record this webinar and it will be posted on the OSRL website after completion. If you do have any, sorry. Okay, if you do have any questions during the webinar, please do post them on the chat function. We will take questions at the end, but if you have any questions during, put them on the chat function and we'll pick them up at the end and answer those accordingly. As I said, this webinar has been recorded and will be available on the OSRL website afterwards. So today's presenters are Asha Luthra. Asha, introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Asha Luthra, Social Performance External Relations Advisor for Shell UK. I've been with Shell for about 9.5 years and 5 years in Aberdeen. And I have been kind of leading on this project over the last few years. Hannah?
Okay, thank you, Asha. Hannah?
Hi everyone, so my name's Hannah Curd. I'm the Emergency Response Specialist for Shell UK. I've been in my current role for 5 years. My role looks after the onshore support for any of our assets on or offshore that might require any kind of emergency response support. Before that, I was working for our Oil Spill Expertise Centre for 3 years based in London, which was a global role supporting Shell's oil spill response capability. And then prior to that, I worked for OSRL for 5 years as Senior Response Specialist.
Thank you, Hannah. My name is Ken Church. I work for OSRL. I've been with OSRL for around about 12 years now. I joined as a responder down in Southampton, attended quite a few spills, took that experience into the training team, where I did training for a few years. Then went back into the operations team as a duty manager, where I would have taken the call from members for incidents and responded accordingly. And then 2.5 years ago, I moved up to the Aberdeen office, where we focus on the UK members of OSRL, which is where I got involved with this project. Also on the call today, just listening in, we have members from the SFF, MCA and Ambipar, who may also be available to answer questions at the end if there's anything that's specifically aimed at those. I'll now hand over to Asha to explain a bit more about the project and its background.
Okay, thanks, Ken. In 2010, before I joined Shell, I was living in New Orleans, Louisiana, and witnessed the impacts of the Macondo oil spill. This experience helped me appreciate how closely linked the fishing and energy industries are, and how many lives are impacted by the interconnectedness and delicate balance between these two industries. I also saw the impact that the spill had on the environment, as well as the seafood, restaurant, and tourism industries across the Gulf Coast states at the time. I was struck with how many fishing vessels were used to support the response, and I wondered whether local fishermen had any knowledge about or practical experience doing this type of work before the spill actually occurred. Soon after I joined Shell in 2011, I became aware of a program that had just gotten started in Brazil to train fishermen in oil spill response. The pictures on this slide are from that project. I tucked that program back in my mind, and I knew that I wanted to do something similar when I had a role supporting an offshore business in the future if there was a need. In 2015, I got my chance when I began my role as Social Performance and External Relations Advisor for the UK upstream business in Aberdeen. I soon realized how important the commercial fishing industry is to the business in exploration, existing operations, new projects, and decommissioning. I soon learned that our business frequently used fishing vessels as guard and chase vessels to protect exposed infrastructure and warn other approaching vessels. But no one I spoke to at the time was aware of any established ongoing oil spill response training programs with fishermen in the UK. Given my non-technical background, I just posed the question, why aren't we proactively working with fishermen on a regular basis to prepare for something that we hope that will never happen? We should be drawing on their expertise, skills, maneuverability, and extensive presence throughout the North Sea. Training fishermen about oil spills and how to respond benefits the fishermen, the energy industry, and ultimately protects the coastline communities that could be impacted by a spill. Given that I don't have any oil spill experience or any fishing experience for that matter, I knew that I would need a team of people who were experts in their field and who were as passionate and committed about this project as I was. The core team is comprised of Hannah, Ken, the Scottish Fishermen's Federation, otherwise known as the SFF, the Maritime Coastguard Agency, or MCA, and the MCA's contractor, Ambipar Response. The fishermen were very interested in getting involved from the beginning because they see themselves as the custodians of the sea. They had also participated in one-off exercises before, but they were really interested in seeing something develop further. Like us, they wanted the project to be impactful and constructive and not just a PR exercise. We also received support from Shell's marine logistics and HSE teams, as well as Shell's global oil spill expertise team. We started doing some research and contacted representatives from other established oil spill programs that trained fishermen, such as the one in Alaska managed by Alyeska Pipeline and NOFO's industry-led project in Norway that some of you may be aware of. We also set up a call with the Shell Brazil team to get their advice about how to implement an effective and sustainable project, even though we recognize that the culture, environment, and the fishing industry was very different in Scotland. We combined the learnings from these 3 programs in other countries and then figured out how best to adapt their core elements to the UK context. We presented our initial plans to the Oil and Gas UK's Oil Spill Response Forum in October of 2017. Oil and Gas UK, or OG UK, is the leading representative body for the offshore oil and gas sector in the UK. During our presentation, we received a lot of positive feedback from other operators, and we learned about how the industry, with the support of OG UK, had tried to implement a similar training program soon after the Macondo spill. However, after a while, that project lost momentum and was ultimately suspended. Learning about the history just encouraged us to move forward with our idea because it confirmed that others in the industry, the fishermen, and regulators believed that it was a valuable initiative. The project just needed a team to drive it forward and set it apart from a lot of competing priorities. We decided that the simplest and most efficient way at the time was for us to test the concept, was for Shell to initially lead the project with our partners, OSRL, the MCA, and Ambipar Response. Although we always understood that eventually this project would need to be industry-led to achieve long-term viability and success. So the goal of this project really was to identify a few vessels that were most suited to deploy oil spill response equipment and begin developing a pool of fishermen who were pre-trained to take samples, test dispersant effectiveness, and quickly respond in the unlikely event of a spill. So next, we are going to watch about a 6-minute video or so, and the link is right in the meeting chat box. And if you can just copy and paste that link and make sure that you're on mute over the next 6 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more in detail about what happened during the training. But this video just provides, an overview of some of the highlights about what happened.
T'as switché, c'est drôle. J'ai entendu t'essayer de rattraper, après c'était drôle.
Okay, hopefully everybody's had a chance to watch that video now. If not, that link obviously is live, so you'll be able to go back and watch that again later if, at your leisure. So as you saw from the video, the training for the fishing cruise started last year. So in November last year, I travelled up to Peterhead to some SFF facilities to provide training. And that training included what could happen to oil once it's released into the marine environment. So we looked at how it might weather, how it might change once in the marine environment, how it might spread. And we trained the fishermen on observing the spill and being able to report back on that spill. So that included things like the quantification as well, how to measure the size of a slick and then look at the different colours to gauge the volume of oil on the surface. Part of that training also included oil sampling kits and UKCS dispersant effectiveness test kits. We looked at when we would use these kits. So the sampling kit you would potentially use to take samples of an oil spill at the MCA's request or even at the operator's request. And then the UK dispersant effectiveness test kits would be used for testing a dispersant against the oil to see if that dispersant would be effective. So part of that was when we would use those kits, the safety considerations, not only of the equipment itself, but the site that you might be entering. So obviously looking at site entry protocols, what safety measures you might need to put in place before carrying out those equipment use. We looked at how to use it and then how to record and share the results. Once we've done the classroom theory piece, if you like, We then went on to planning for an actual deployment of equipment. So the SSF provided vessels for us to deploy equipment from. These vessels were already in use within the oil industry in the UK as guard vessels, and as such, they'd met certain safety standard criteria. But prior to us deploying equipment from them, we had to go along again and do some more safety inspections, and also we carried out for OSRL a vessel of opportunity inspection, which does look at safety, but also looks at the actual suitability of a vessel for deploying equipment from. So looking at those two images on the screen there, we've got the Artemis and the Morning Dawn, which are the two vessels we used. You might think, looking at the Artemis, that would be a challenging vessel to mount any sort of response from. It's very high-sided. It's not a particularly large vessel. There doesn't look to be much deck space. But when you have closer inspection, you'll see that on the stern there, she has two spaces at the back where fishing nets would normally be deployed from. And on inspection, we realised that actually that might be a good vessel for deploying boom from. Inside those open hatches there are two big reels that they would normally have nets on that we thought were suitable for deploying boom. Should also be a good vessel for carrying out observations. She's quite high-sided, as we said, so that gives a little bit of height. So she'd be able to carry out observations. She would be able to use for sampling, and she would be able to be used for dispersant efficacy testing, effectiveness testing. The Morning Dawn, another fishing vessel, different style, different shape, lower freeboard this time, so more suitable for deploying equipment over the side. Does have more deck space and also actually has tanks on board that could be used for recovering waste into. So a little bit more suitable for containment recovery activities. Would also be suitable for fitting portable dispersant application systems onto. And that was our second vessel. Once we checked the vessels and we're happy with what vessels we were taking, we then need to look at what response equipment we might want to test in this situation. And we wanted to test as big a variety of equipment as we could. So in conjunction with Ambipar, the MCA's contractors, we agreed various bits of equipment that we could take along to test. And that included the boom on the top left reel there. So that normally would be deployed from that reel. But in this case, we took it off the reel and put it inside the Artemis and deployed it from the fishing reels. We took a skimmer along, which is the top center picture there, which is what is used for recovering the oil from the water once it's contained within the boom. That is a weir skimmer, a fairly generic skimmer that would be suitable for use in the UK waters. Bottom right, we took a dispersant effectiveness test kit. We'd carried out using this in the classroom, but we wanted to change it to try it on real time as well on board the vessel and re-demonstrate it. So we took the dispersant effectiveness test kit along. And then the bottom right-hand picture is the dispersant application system. In this case, we took the FIDO system along, which is a relatively small portable system that can fit onto many vessels. And that was taken onto the Morning Dawn. Ambipar brought along the current buster, which is the image of the bottom left, and a boom vane to deploy with the current buster to demonstrate that a fishing boat could be used for a single ship system. So that's deploying the current buster with a boom vane to show that only one vessel would be needed in that particular scenario. Agreed the equipment. We then looked at the logistics of getting all the equipment into one place and where we were going to deploy it from. The SFF offered us the port of Fraserburgh, which was a good choice. It sticks out in a little bit of a peninsula, so there is sheltered waters depending on the weather to the north or to the east. And we were actually quite fortunate on the day because the exercise took place in March that the weather was quite good to us, and we did have some sheltered water to the north where we deployed. We had to obviously coordinate logistics between Shell, SFF, OSRL, and the MCA, and Ambipar to get all the equipment there and ready for deployment. So we set the date for early March and organised the logistics of getting that equipment to the port, and the SFF arranged for logistics of actually unloading trucks and loading the vessels in the port. You can see bottom centre there, that's the boom being taken off its reel and put into the back of the Artemis. Then the right-hand picture is the current buster being unloaded from its container. So that equipment arrived on the 8th of March. After safety briefs was loaded onto the vessels. On completion of loading the vessels, we then carried out an operational brief for the following day's activities and a further safety brief with all the vessel crews and any stakeholders, anybody who was taking part was at that operational brief. Then on the morning of the 9th, we had an early start in the port. We all arrived again for a safety brief and a refresh of the operational brief before we went to sea, as you saw in the video. Once at sea, the Artemis began deploying the offshore boom from her fishing reels, which went really well, very successful. And while she was doing that, on the Morning Dawn, we demonstrated the dispersant effectiveness test kits, and then we deployed the dispersant equipment, spraying water to simulate dispersant. On completion of demonstrating that equipment, we then put that equipment away, and at this point the boom was out from the Artemis. So the Morning Dawn picked up the tow, as you can see in the top left picture there, and we formed a U formation and then into a J formation, where we deployed the skimmer in to simulate recovering oil from a contained spill. That all seemed to go quite well. Following that, we put that equipment away, and then the Ambipar team put out the current buster and the boom vane, which again demonstrated that single ship system, and the Morning Dawn towed that vessel while the Artemis stood by and observed from a distance. That equipment was then put away and the vessels returned to harbour. So some of the lessons that we learnt during the response, during the exercise, fishing vessels are quite manoeuvrable, but they're not used to really slow handling operations. So when we're towing boom, for those of you that may not know, when a boom's in the water being towed during recovery, the boom needs to be towed at less than 1 knot. So that's quite slow, and that was challenging for these vessels. They're not used to going that slow, so that was challenging. But we had 2 very experienced skippers on board, so they overcame the challenge of the vessel's ability and did actually manage that. But it's just something we need to bear in mind going forward, making sure that the skippers do get the opportunity to tow boom and practice that before a response. PSVs, fishing vessels are potentially going to be more available at time of a response than PSVs. There's quite a lot of fishing vessels, as you can imagine, in the UK waters. So they're going to be more available, and they're more able to use smaller harbours. So that might take some of the pressure off during a response of the bigger ports, such as, just examples, Aberdeen, Inverness, where you would expect the PSVs and anchor handlers to be operating out of. Using fishing vessels for some of the response would take some of the pressure off those vessels and also off those port areas as well. Obviously, if we're going to be operating fishing boats independently of other response vessels, which is the ultimate aim, then they're going to need some sort of continuous training to make sure they maintain a certain standard and are experienced in deploying the equipment that needs to be deployed. I'll now hand you over to Hannah, who will talk about some of the potential benefits of this project.
Thank you, Ken. So we obviously had a look at this project, and there's quite a number of benefits from an overall point of view, from reducing the response time and increasing our pool of trained responders. So as you're all aware, if you have a contract with OSRL, you get a certain number of trained responders, 18 from the SLA, and they don't actually go very far when you consider you're going to need support within the emergency response centre. You're going to need them for the shoreline, you're going to need them offshore, so they kind of get spread around quite a bit. So by increasing the number of people we have pre-trained, it just allows us to sort of increase our ability to actually respond to that incident. As you would have seen in the video, it did actually increase the confidence of the responders. So the fishermen had a little bit of apprehension before we went out there and did this project with them. But once they saw the equipment and they sort of saw how straightforward it was, once they had the training, they were quite sort of on board and excited by this project. So it kind of took away that apprehension which might be there if we have a real incident that happens. It also allows us to go above and beyond our regulatory requirements. So there is a requirement that we respond to oil spills in the most efficient way, but this allows us to go sort of above and beyond by increasing our skill pool. And again, it's partnering with one of the industry's key stakeholders to build capability and increase new skills and just being proactive. From an individual benefits from the different types of training we did with regards to the surveillance element, it allows us to speak the same language. So if you've got someone on scene that it's able to talk from, for example, the Bonn Agreement, which is what we use here in the UK, to discuss what the oil looks like, its quantification, etc. From the initial, from what the fishermen are seeing. It allows you to just have an easier sort of set of communications and just better descriptions for what you're actually seeing. The sampling element in the UK is a regulatory requirement, so it allows us to be more efficient with that. So in the current state, then we make do with what we can get hold of. In some cases, as I've got in brackets there, it's sometimes a coffee jar or a honey jar or whatever they can get hold of that they, you know, would dip in and get the sample. It is a regulatory requirement to provide a sample to the MCA, but you also need a sample for yourselves to be able to do the fingerprint testing, again, to allow you that confidence that it's being collected by a trained personnel that has had a degree of training on that piece of equipment. And then it allows you to do the fingerprinting. So again, it gives you that level of confidence in the future that if, for example, if it's a significant size of spill, that fingerprint testing can be reliable if it turns up in the future. From the dispersant effectiveness testing, then again, we want to make kits available to the fishermen to be able to perform those tests. So again, as we stand at the moment, we'd have to get a sample of dispersant, get it sent out there, do the shaky bottle test before we can then start having those conversations with the regulator. The ERRV, so those are the vessels that support our platforms. They have dispersant in the UK. They have to have an amount of dispersant on board. They have one particular dispersant on board, and the majority of them don't carry dispersant that is readily available in the UK on a wider scale. So by the fishermen having that ability to test that dispersant that we have readily available, we can then get it out there, get it tested, and have the discussion with the regulator a lot quicker. Because in the UK, dispersant is one of our sort of top response options that we have. And the hands-on equipment training, again, as I mentioned before, it gives them that real-time experience and reduces the anxiety that they might be facing on that. The next steps that we want to be putting into place is to start bringing it to an industry-led project across the North Sea that benefits all the participating operators. We'd like to take it to the OG UK. We got another session on that next month. And what we're hoping to do is have a workshop from there and to bring all the operators on board to be able to push this forward. Because as Ken mentioned, it's not about doing this one-off. We need to maintain the training and the exercising of the participants in this, and then we can also grow it to obviously more than just the pilot project and the fishermen and the fishing vessels that we actually trained up. We want to do different exercise scenarios, so there's lots of different versions of what could happen out there. And again, continue with the working with the MCA and Ambipar and various other groups that would be involved in these exercises, and potentially longer term consider localizing equipment that will be able to be deployed a lot sooner. And we're hoping, we talked a lot about this project, which is a UK-based initiative. After what Ashley said, we actually researched from other countries. But we do feel that this project is something that can be transferable. And again, as with the other ones, we can learn from it to be able to transfer and share our learnings to other parts of the world, if they feel it's appropriate to support in that way. So again, we want to provide our sort of details. If there's any sort of direct feedback that you want to give, if you don't want to speak on this project, but I'm going to hand you back over to Ken now to continue.
Thanks, Hannah. So yeah, contact details are there for the project contacts. We are about to open up the session for any questions that you might have. So feel free to either type your questions into the chat function, or if you want to raise your hand, we'll come to you and take your questions. It was so good. There are no questions.
We've got Peter would like. So Peter, if you'd like to unmute yourself, you can go ahead and ask a question.
Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon, folks. Just a question or a couple of questions here regarding the equipment is kept permanently on these vessels, or is it kept shoreside? So if it is shoreside, there would be a mobilization time period, yeah? Is that correct?
So at the moment, there is no equipment kept with the vessels. This is just a pilot project, if you like, to demonstrate that the vessels could deploy the equipment. The plan is to roll this project out and hopefully get industry buy-in in the UK. And at that point, that's when we'll be looking at how we're going to supply that equipment, whether it just stays as response equipment as it currently is and will be mobilised at the time of response, or whether we move a stockpile nearer to the fishing vessels, or maybe on the coastline up in the northeast of Scotland somewhere, or elsewhere in Scotland. That's something that's to be decided. But right now, there is no equipment actually on the vessels. There are plans to put the dispersant effectiveness test kits and sampling kits on the vessels in the near future, so they will be able to use quite straight away. But the actual response equipment itself isn't currently on the vessels. But we're looking at options of how we might do that in the future. But you're right. The closer it is to the vessels, the quicker it will be to respond with it. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So I guess you could train several vessel crews on various vessels, so you could have a choice. Yeah,
that would be the plan. Yeah, the vessels. Each vessel is they're all different. So they're all, as you saw, the two vessels we use, they're all different. So I think, in my opinion, the way forward would be to have a database of the vessels that could be available and what their abilities are, so we know what equipment can be deployed on what vessel at the time of response, and we've already got that stored somewhere. We know what equipment to take to what vessels, and we know what's available at the time and what the actual incident requires as well.
Okay, good. One more question. Weather constraints on a fishing vessel as opposed to a PSV or a 60-meter ERRV. What's a consideration?
It would be a consideration, certainly. I'll probably actually ask one of the SFF guys if they could answer that question, what the weather restrictions are on fishing boats. I would guess it would depend on the fishing boat itself. Is there anybody from the SFF who could clarify on that one?
Hi, Ken. It's Stephen from the SFF here. Yes, again, it would depend on the individual vessel, much as we do with the other kind of offshore work we do. It's at the end of the day, it's left to the individual skipper what his particular, I suppose the boats are all different shapes and sizes can do, but I would think probably to deploy the equipment or that would be more the factor rather than the crews themselves. It would, I think the boats themselves are used to working in pretty rough conditions, but it would probably be the kind of industry standards for deploying the equipment that would come into play there. Just while I'm on as well, I was just going to add, again from the SFF, we appreciated the opportunity to take part in the both onshore and offshore trials. And I think, as Hannah said, there was maybe an apprehension from the fishermen, but I would also add we have been over the years just saying, look, there is more I think fishing boats can offer sometimes to the oil and gas industry. So it was good from our side. We had been waiting a bit of a chance to get the opportunity to do this type of work. So it was good to kind of prove ourselves a bit on the day, and we'll look forward to future exercises. And the only other thing I was going to add, at the moment we do, through the SFF and its constituent associations, have a real wide geographical spread of vessels throughout the country, but also we have association bases like in the Orkneys and the Shetlands and further down south as well. So if that was something that was going to be looked into, potentially storing equipment onshore in some of these places, we could hopefully assist with that as well.
That's great. Thank you very much, Stephen. That's great. Thanks for your feedback. That's good comments. Thank you.
We have quite a few more questions here. There's one. Do you have a target for the number of VOOs you'd like to have in your pool? I don't know if that's a question for.
Is that a question for Asha, perhaps?
Yeah, I don't think we've set a target at this point.
I think so.
But we do know that we need to train a lot more than we currently have. So we've trained 3 vessel crews with the oil spill sampling and the dispersant effectiveness, and then 2 of the vessel crews for the actual practical training of the boom deployment. So, you know, in order for it to really be effective, it's going to have to be a lot more. Now, Shell has probably in the last few years used about 30 different Scottish fishing vessels for guard vessel duty or other types of offshore support, and Stephen might be able to comment a little bit on kind of the number of vessels in their membership that could possibly be trained going forward.
And then sort of a follow-up to that was, are the vessels available immediately, and what's the minimum response time for them to be available?
Yeah, and I'll let Stephen, I'll start and then I'll pass it over to Stephen. So the 2 vessels that we focused on were vessels that are primarily used for industry support. So they're members of the Scottish Fishermen's Federation Services arm of the SFF, and so they can be easily deployed if they're not working, you know, on a job already, for example. So they don't have nets, you know, on them that would have to be removed, and then so that's one of the reasons why we prioritize them, because they're kind of set up to do this type of work. But let me hand over to Stephen and see if he has anything to add about that.
Okay, thanks, Sasha. Yeah, you're right. We do have about, I suppose, 5 vessels that could really be deployed at quite short notice, because they're doing more of this alternative work than they are doing fishing at the moment. But through our wider associations, the SFF does have about 400 vessels in its membership, and probably about 100 to 150 of that boats would be boats that could go further offshore and take part in oil exercises that way. But the other thing, again, we've just had a significant milestone at the moment. We now have, since the start of the millennium, we've used 550 different vessels on alternative work to fishing, like oil and gas related renewables and subsea cables. So we really have quite a big number of vessels, plus a big geographical spread. So we usually can provide boats at fairly short notice. I suppose 48 hours to 72 hours would maybe be a norm, but again, with the likes of specifically the oil spill response, we would need to get the training done first to increase the size of the pool.
We have one more question. Someone's got their hand up there. John Spink.
Hi. It's just a couple of practical questions, mostly focused on the boom and recovery side of things. The picture showed 2 fishing vessels or ex-fishing vessels deploying a boom, and then there was mention of oil recovery via skimmer. I wonder if anybody could explain to me how that would actually be achieved in reality, because I don't think it's possible for an ex-fishing boat to recover crude oil from the sea for regulatory reasons. And as an additional question, once the boom's been deployed, like everything else in real life, oil spill incidents are really messy, as I'm sure some of the people in here will know. And recovering that dirty boom, oil-covered boom, back into the aft shelter deck space would certainly give me some concerns in terms of kind of vapour and fumes and what risk could be exposed to the crew of the vessel itself, as I don't think the level of ventilation, etc., would be set up with that in mind. So how would we deal with that? It's just a practical question, or 2 practical questions. Thanks.
Hi, John. Yeah, 2 good questions there. So in regards to the boom deployment recovery, yeah, very good points. But the idea of this exercise that we delivered was to demonstrate that these vessels could be used for deployments of booms. So yes, going forward, that would be something we'd have to consider carefully. And if we deemed it wasn't suitable for them to deploy and recover booms for safety reasons, then obviously that wouldn't happen. But they could still potentially be used as tow vessels.
Definitely,
the booms could be deployed by another vessel, maybe an offshore support vessel, and that could act as a mother vessel, if you like. And these vessels take away and do the towing.
Indeed.
So that's something that have to be considered. And yes, the regulatory requirements are something we'd have to look at for the waste handling as well. At the time of response, there's going to be a lot around the waste handling and how we deal with that. So yes, the 2 good points we'll take on board and we'll take into consideration. The fishing boat did actually have tanks on board in its hold that could be used for oil and had been used for fuels in the past. But yeah, the legal side of things would have to be considered, certainly.
Yeah, because I think once you start recovering oil, I think the current marine guidance note, I could be correct wrong here because it's been changed recently. I think the vessel has to almost be designated a tanker, so I'm not 100% sure in that, but it kind of does pose a challenge, not an insurmountable challenge, but there's a wee challenge there, regulatory wise, that needs to be looked at.
Certainly, yeah, that's good points. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for answering the question.
There's 2 sort of fairly related questions that came in here on the chat. There's one is, how will the vessels used be compensated? And then I guess along that same line, how is the liability insurance managed with respect to damage on either side?
Yeah, I can take that. So so as part of this pilot, the SFF were actually, very generous and donated not only their crew's time to test the pilot, but then also, donated the use of their vessels. However, going forward once this, expands, that's something that's going to have to be kind of included in the overall budget for the project because, it's something in order to make the project sustainable, the fishermen should be compensated for not only the time that they're donating in order for the training, but then also for the time during an actual response. So that's something that that we have considered. And then the question about the liability insurance, that's something that was pretty straightforward for Shell during this pilot because we already have a contract in place with the SFF to secure guard vessels. So those terms are in the contract currently. However, we do know that once we have other companies involved and make it a more collaborative initiative going forward, that's something that's going to have to be agreed upon by all of the operators who want to participate. But in our initial conversations with our lawyers and within Shell, they recommended that that although that there could be some things that would need to be worked out, that there's not things that wouldn't be able to be overcome.
Okay, there's another one. How do we see the industry being involved under OSRL terms and conditions and existing UKCS agreement? That might be one that maybe you can take, Ken.
Yeah, thanks. That's from Tina. Thank you, Tina. That's something, again, we haven't looked that far ahead yet because at the moment this is like a pilot project where we're just showing that vessels could be used during response. That'll be something that will come out as we take the project forward and it becomes hopefully an industry project. Something we'll have to thrash out at that point about how we deliver it, whether it be operators that they maintain their own training, so that doesn't have to be delivered by OSRL or other people in the UK that can deliver response training. Or whether it comes under OSRL as part of our existing agreement is something we'd have to look at in the future. It's not something that's been considered at this stage. It's just a pilot project to demonstrate that the vessels could be used during a response. Hopefully that answers your question.
We are hoping to take it to the OGUK and have this discussion and make it a working group. And then at that point, that's hopefully where we'll thrash out exactly how we can put this into action. And if it's agreed or thought through that OSRL would be an option under the UKCS agreement, then obviously that'll be taken forward in that area. But until we can get it kind of further down the line of talking with the rest of the sort of industry coming on board, then we don't know where that bit's going. But we're hitting OG UK first to get a working group to take it forward.
Okay, we don't have any more questions in the chat. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to ask?
Hi, this is Andrew Ritchie from Shell. Just picking up on Hannah's point there, and those of us who joined the webinar today have an interest in the subject matter. But as you think about seeking to roll the project out beyond those who've been working on it just now, where do you see the biggest challenge, and is there any help that those who are listening in on this webinar might provide in terms of the next steps?
So that's a very good question. We tend to always have a degree of support when there's people, like you said, that are very well versed in this sort of area, that understand the oil spill side of things and the environmental aspects, etc. And everyone's fully on board. And what has been seen in the past is that the stumbling blocks tend to be, what about the liabilities? Here's a fuel to balance, and you guys know equipment safety. So there's some very good questions that have been raised, and things we've already sort of started to look at. To make sure that those things we can cover. So it's a very good point, which is why we kind of want to take it to the OG UK to be able to get it into a working group to then start thrashing out what the rest of the issues might be. And again, I think it was the name's gone now, that raised the issue of the potential regulatory requirements and whether fishing vessels could be utilised. I believe that agreement, that element is no longer an issue. But again, they're things that we need to work out. Asha, I don't know whether you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think our biggest challenge going forward is kind of getting the support of a number of operators, but not only resources, but time, that from key staff, because I know in the past, the oil spill response forum of OG UK, for example, has only really been able to focus on a couple of projects a year, and we don't necessarily want to kind of stop the momentum that we've built. So we're really keen on taking it forward as quickly as we can. And in order to do that, we're going to need some involvement from other companies. But I think that we are at a point where we have worked out a lot of the initial kinks, and that's really what the intent was, to go ahead and kind of do the pilot with Shell leading it, is because we wanted to demonstrate that a lot of the basic concerns that people may have expressed in the past, that they can really kind of be overcome if there's the commitment among the in the industry, and in a hope that that we are able to really demonstrate the number of benefits of working across all of these partners can bring us.
I think it's worth kind of pointing the elephant out in the room, that a big thing as well is the financial aspect of bringing this project together. Again, everyone can be super keen and think it's a great project and really beneficial to the industry and to the environment and all that kind of stuff. But obviously the current situation that we're in means that everyone's probably going to be tightening the purse strings and maybe not having as many funds available. So that's going to be another area that we're going to have to really consider where we stand as we push this forward.
Are there any more questions from anyone else?
There's a hand up from Michael. Did you want to go on unmute and give us a question?
Yes, good afternoon, colleagues. Michael O'Toole from the Irish Coast Guard. I suppose it's just a general comment. It's maybe to offer thanks for your time in sharing this presentation. we found it very informative. I suppose Ireland and the UK, and particularly maybe Scotland, in terms of our fishing industries, are quite similar. So in that context, this has been interesting for us. At the beginning, in the outset, it was described that you've been influenced by other jurisdictions and work in other countries. And we have a level of interest, say, in the model in Norway in this area. And I'm just wondering what countries do you perceive most influence the work here in terms of what you've done, and maybe what lessons have you learned or extracted from other experiences in other jurisdictions? Thank you.
Yeah, I can kind of begin to address that, and so I think in terms of the program that's probably most similar would be perhaps the one that's organized by Alaska Pipeline in Alaska and the Norwegian program by NOFO. You know, both of those really involve, you know, numerous operators, are training a lot of vessels. They're just further down the road. They've been going on. I mean, the Alaska program has been going on since right after the Exxon Valdez spill. So they've had a number of learnings. And, you know, I think that's really where we learned that in order to have a successful program, like, you need, you know, dedicated people to help kind of manage it too, because as Hannah and Ken mentioned earlier, you know, you can't just train a number of people and just kind of, you know, to have your hands, you know, off of that, you know, after the initial training. You know, you need to maintain it. And so I think we've learned things actually from both of those countries, but neither one were directly similar to the context in the UK. So that's why, you know, we adapted it, and we fully recognize that the pilot that we conducted too is quite a scaled down version. Some of the training that was done in Norway too was much closer to shore. It was what my understanding was. So the kinds of equipment that they tested were not the same, and Ken might be able to add more about that. And then the program in Brazil, which started after soon after Macondo, that you know, also was much closer to shore. The vessels that they used were, you know, not at all comparable to the ones that the SFF have. They're much smaller, and that program was much more about, you know, ensuring that, you know, the fishermen kind of understood about what the oil industry was all about, because it was quite new at the time in Brazil. Whereas here in the UK, you know, the Scotland have a very long history of working with the industry. So, so that's another difference. So we took, you know, some of the key learnings, and then, you know, we adapted where we needed to. I don't know if Ken, if you have anything up to add.
No, I think it's quite a good summary there. Thank you, Asher. Just that you mentioned the Norway piece. They tend to use their fishing boats for what I describe as near shore and shoreline support, if you like. They use for smaller booms, if you like, moving them for protection, shoreline protection, that sort of thing, rather than they do also do offshore containment recovery, but predominantly they've got NOFO have got their own vessels for that. So they use a fishing fleet there for, as I said, that near shore and shoreline piece more often. So that's something that we could look at as well. But right now, I think we've sort of concentrated this piece on the offshore response piece. Thank you.
And thank you both.
So yeah, if anybody has any additional questions, please feel free to contact any of us. We'd be happy to discuss any of this further offline. But it seems like we are at the hour at this point. And thank you so much for everyone for participating and attending. It's been really valuable to us to hear your questions and feedback.
Yes, thank you everybody for giving up the time to come and listen to us today. Just to reiterate, the webinar will be available on our website There's a link, I believe, has just come up on the chat function. And so you should be able to find it on our website very shortly if it's not already there. Okay, thank you, and stay safe. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you
Bye.
very much. Bye.